We're at the end of the day 2 of Science and the City at HLF 2025. And in this final session for the day, it's almost apt that we chose to talk about how citizens can participate in scientific inquiry. So across these 2 days, we have heard enough number of experts in scientific research talking about the work that they do. But Nandita was an example of how she drove change in society. And that's the kind of conversation we would like to take ahead from here and try to ask questions if the role of citizens in scientific research is merely that of a taxpayer or something more active than that. In this discussion, we have 2 panelists. Sekhsaria, who works at the Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas at IIT Bombay. He has also worked earlier at the DST Center for Policy Research at IIT Delhi. He works at the interface of science, environment, technology, and society. He has written widely on environmental development and wildlife conservation in India. It includes a book on citizen science and ecology in India. He wrote that a little far ago in 2022, and a more recent one on the Nicobar Islands, which is called The Great Nicobar Betrayal. Along with Pankaj, we will have Kavita Vemuri, who is a neuroscientist from IIIT Hyderabad. She studies of various different kinds of things, including human behavior in everyday interactions, the complexity of empathy, sexual objectification, functional brain, and clinical conditions from environmental pollution. And in this session, she is our choice of panelist because she mobilized citizens of Hyderabad against air pollution being caused by rampant construction activities in the city. Pankaj and Kavita's interaction will be moderated by Anushila Chatterjee. Anushila is a science communicator, primarily trained in biology. She works as a science communicator at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Hyderabad, where she is trying to make science accessible to a wide variety of stakeholders. And she's working with a variety of scientists working in physics, chemistry, biology, you name it, she works with them. And it is probably only appropriate for a person of her caliber and experience to moderate this session because the kind of science and the scientific research we want to touch upon is also going to be equally wide. Anushila, over to you now.
Thank you everyone for coming to this discussion. I think this could be a discussion where we have a lot of debate, and it'll be nice rather than just 10 minutes if we could also include the public, all of you, in the question answer round. So we'll probably keep our discussions till say 30 minutes or so that we can have 20 minutes. Okay, Kavita says 20 minutes. So it'll be nice if all of you could also participate as participants in this discussion, driving this discussion in some way as well. So people have engaged with science in various capacities, sometimes as a participant, and this participation could be in a awareness campaign, in a position where they're receiving knowledge and also contributing it. So the second capacity in which people have contributed is as collaborators, participants with various degrees of involvement, and also as full-time investigators, as scientists. So this discussion is focusing on people who are not full-time scientists. How can they drive scientific inquiry? And with that, I ask the first question to both Kavita and Pankaj. Is it mostly, when have the public driven scientific inquiry? And is it mostly instances where they have identified with a cause, or they have been at the receiving end of some policy or being affected by an issue? So, yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. So I'll just a little bit of a context of what I will be able to say. And I just want to check if people at the back are able to hear, because when I was standing, I was not able to. So, okay, fine. So the little work that I have done around this broad topic of citizen science is in the field of ecology. And not as much actually as an ecologist or a scientist himself, but more as a sociologist of science. So I've always been interested in the field of ecology as a bird watcher, as a wildlifer. I've written about it. But more recently, about a decade or so ago, I had an opportunity of researching and doing my PhD work in a field known as science and technology studies, which is broadly, actually very interestingly, using methods in history, philosophy, anthropology, but studying science and scientists and technology and technologists. So the scientist lab, as it were, becomes the field site of the ethnographer. So that's the context that I'm coming from. And when I finished my PhD work, I was very keen on trying to see if I can bring my interest in wildlife together with my new engagements with studying science and studying scientists. And about 7 or 8 years ago, when we started off, this whole thing of what is called citizen science, and particularly in ecology, seemed to be kind of taking off in India. And so at that time I was at IIT Delhi, and I collaborated with my colleague there, Naveen Thail, and with whom we did this book and this little report, where we started to look at these projects that were calling themselves citizen science and ecology. And we did a basic documentation of what these projects were, some numbers in terms of what is the data that they were gathering, what is the kind of people that were, in terms of numbers, that were participating, and what, if any, were scientific outputs, and also larger engagements and outputs in the public. And so we did a documentation of that, and we also spoke to a number of coordinators of these projects that are called citizen science projects. So why I'm giving this context is for two reasons. One is to kind of explain that I'm talking from that understanding of the field of ecology. There's a lot of other interesting work in citizen science that's happening in protein folding, in astronomy. And there are interesting overlaps between what areas tend to lend or seem to lend themselves to scientific research in this kind of mode, where the non-expert, if you were to put it that way, kind of contributes. Of course, there is the scale issue, the temporal and the spatial scales that cannot be done by the regular scientists. But going back to your question, Anushila, is if we look at ecology, and perhaps a lot of the other sciences, you have to go back into history, and a lot of the ecological data that has been collected historically would actually have been by the amateur. And in this book, and we also document, and I'll just read out a few lines to give you a sense of what that perhaps is. And we quote a couple of other writers who talk about, so there is Abraham Miller Rushing and fellow researchers provide some interesting examples from history as evidence of public participation in generating science in ecology in terms of evidence and stuff like that. And they talk of winemakers in France who have been recording grape harvest dates for more than 640 years. Court diarists in Kyoto, Japan, recording dates of the traditional cherry blossom festival for 1200 years. Citizens and officials in China tracking outbreaks of locusts for about 3,500 years. So in some senses, citizens have been gathering this data that a set of other people are then putting together. So even some of the data that Darwin gathered was through a very large network of people sending him information, sending him samples on which then he based his kind of work. So, and then of course in a more recent context, in the last 100 years or so, where ecology is concerned, we have had a lot of projects, including in India. So I think science as a profession, or science as a calling, I think is far more recent than what has been the practice of science across disciplines. I've given examples in ecology and in natural history, but I think it's far larger. It goes much deeper into time than we kind of think. So I think the professionalization of science through the academy, through institutions, is very recent, relatively speaking.
I mean, this brings me to a question for Kavita, actually. So you mentioned the citizen science projects where citizens, when we are saying non-experts now, just to be a little clear, who have contributed to the process of doing science, whatever role that is. Now, my question to Kavita is, do you think there are only certain kinds of questions that the public can drive, and where their participation is not limited to just collecting data, but they're actually, and it almost borders on, say, advocacy at that point. So can you highlight or talk to us a little bit more about the kind of problems? And also, do you think there's also going to be a distinction in the scale of problems that the public can attempt when they are driving the inquiry versus when they are participating in it, such as for data collection? So what is the scale of problems for these two?
So, can you hear me? Yes? Okay.
So I take this one.
So I think there are few problems maybe that people, all of us cannot take part in. When we say a scientist, we are not experts in every field, right? We are just maybe in that very core area that we are kind of searching for something. And just a side note, I was very struck by something. This is called the George Orwell Hall, and he has a very good essay called "What is Science?" So it's something that we all should read. Read it. I won't give you a gist of it. So when we say what are the topics that people can engage in, whether they are giving data or they're part of the whole process of exploration. Let's talk science to be some kind of an exploration or an inquiry, or we call it as research. That means we are trying to find some pattern, we are trying to find something. The only distinction between somebody who works in a lab and is given a profession called scientist is maybe just the word, it's a profession. It's something that I'm given a title, I'm given a salary, or I'm working on this. All of us should have this attitude towards exploration and asking things, very small things. For example, there are all that Pankaj mentioned, logging birds. I mean, birds is the eBird project is one of the most successful project. The Cornell's Merlin project is also a very successful project. So there may be some topics to answer your question. So definitely atomic bomb, I wouldn't want people doing it in their backyard. But all other problems are problems where even the scientist is situated in. The scientist is not existing outside this community. The scientist is also a citizen. So when we approach somebody, we don't approach them to say, I'm looking at you as somebody who's a data point. Okay, I have some colleagues here who will kind of immediately correct me and say, but you took data from us and you said you are a data point. But yes, because there's a brain sciences part of it where we ask them to come to the lab, and in my area, anybody who crosses my corridor is a data point. Okay, but they're also somebody who can engage with the research question that is happening. So we don't have to have expertise, but it is to actually create an awareness, right? I may not be.
Does that also mean that each of these regulatory
or any of those, but I can actually understand it to the point where I can be aware of it. So if I see a case, I can say, oh, there seems to be some pattern in this area. There seems to be a high incidence of tuberculosis. Can I put it in some place? Okay, so some areas, no, but there are a lot of areas in which scientists can be, citizens and citizen scientists. I call everybody a scientist. Everybody is an explorer, to actually log their findings. I think that is what we need to create as a country. I'm just going ahead in my answer to it, right?
This also, when you spoke about this, that you look at everybody as an explorer, as a scientist, but I'll kind of raise a slightly uncomfortable point over here. What section of the public actually participates in citizen science projects? Isn't it that there's only a select group of people who probably now have the luxury to participate in the kind of projects that have become more widespread? Like, you have to have access to a smartphone. I'm not talking about, I'd love it if you could also give us some examples of grassroots level citizen science projects, but now broadly, like eBird, that's what you mentioned. In some way, it marries a certain hobby with science, and this is already happening with a section of the society who have a primed interest in this particular topic. But
so I'll give you an example of a movement or something that was started by a professor in IIM Ahmedabad, Anil Gupta, called Srishti. It's a place where people from remote areas can document anything that's happening there. Whether it is beehives, whether it is butterflies, we are still saying, oh, it still falls within the ecology and all, but it's still science, right? So they can document, they can send their data, they don't need to be the very elitist kind of a citizen. So there are certain forums, but are they enough? No. How can we bring this, everyone interested into being a part of this whole journey is what I think is the bigger question. I think everyone here can answer this question and say, how do we do it? How can we bring this solution? I don't have an answer to say why no more people are not taking part in it, but I think the question, the answer can come from all of us. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's maybe we're not interested. Most of the times in the air pollution, we've heard the question I get asked is, what's the point? Nothing is going to change. Why are you wasting my time by giving me the survey and taking my lung capacity data and all? Because you can't change anything. You'll publish a paper. The government won't do anything. Right? So I think the lethargy is also because they don't see a tangible output.
I mean, coming to the involvement of the public, I'll ask Pankaj this question. So can you tell us if there's, I'll just change tracks a little bit. So when you talk about citizen science, apart from driven by some organizations or higher educational institutions, is there something like a unified portal in India, for that matter, where people can go to? Because the main thing is public trust in science. Who do you trust when somebody is initiating a citizen science project? Is there a portal of any sort where people can go to? Because that also becomes, I think that's information that we don't want to have, is are there ways in which we can participate? Is there just one platform which tells me what I can participate in? And another, just a follow-up question to that is, are there any, all our expertise are different. And I would say non-experts in science, maybe that particular scientific topic, but everybody is expert in some topic or the other. But how do you ensure a certain level of rigor when it comes to collecting data? And what is the usability of all the data that you get? So what are those steps in place? So these are two questions I was hoping, Pankaj, if you could answer.
So I don't know if there is a kind of omnibus database, but where projects in ecology are concerned, I think if there's one field in which there is a maximum amount of activity in citizen participation and contribution, it is ecology. And like I said earlier, it seems very intuitive because the spatial and the temporal scales that we are looking at is going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for a bunch of scientists and institutions to be able to gather that data set. So if you look at what Kavita mentioned, the state of Indian birds, which is a kind of phenomenal output that's come over the last 2 or 3 years, where this project has gathered a few millions of data points through contributions by tens of thousands of citizens on birds across the subcontinent, and they're presenting to us a status of India's birds which is very refined, which is a lot more granular than we have seen before, and which is tremendous in scale and size, just because of the coverage that you can do by this disaggregated data gathering, which even 100 scientists will not be able to do. But I'll just make one kind of critical point there and then come to what you were asking is, there is this critique of the discussion on citizen science, even globally, that citizens are getting used as free labor and as sources of data. And that perhaps is an unfair, I would agree that it's an unfair characterization, but there is an element of concern over there that there is an instrumentality to this person being there and being able to give me data as a scientist. So having said that, and I say that it's not a fully fair characterization, but that is also the maximum kind of contribution that really happens. These are atomized kind of data sources that come into the picture, and we can discuss that a little later. But coming to a point, so in the field of ecology, there has been some effort to kind of aggregate some of these projects. So for the last 4 or 5 years, there has been a reasonably successful online citizen science in India, citizen science and ecology in India conference that's been happening every year. Actually, we started off in COVID. I'm one of the members of the organizing committee, and it has been quite successful. And some of you might know Suhail Kader, who's also originally from Hyderabad, and other people who've been involved are part of that organizing committee. And we have made an initial effort to to aggregate some of the projects on that website. It's a kind of open site where people are invited to put up the details of the projects that they are doing on citizen science. It is not comprehensive, it is not complete, and it's also suffering because we don't have anybody who's looking at it at all the time. But there is this resource out there if you want to know what's happening, what are the projects, what are they doing, what are their outputs, what are their concerns. Then there is that little resource over there. It's not comprehensive, like I said. To come to your point of the reliability of data, what I found in my research of looking at all these citizen science projects in ecology is that one interesting thing is these are being largely run by scientists. Institutions, occasionally in NGOs, but also where there are scientists, in quotes, who are trained scientists. But there is a huge amount of awareness and effort at ensuring quality of data. So all these projects have interesting, multi-layered and different peer review mechanisms by which you can actually check whether what the data is coming in. So I mean, in eBird, I know, for instance, if you say you found an ostrich in India, it'll obviously get automatically rejected. But if you report something that might be, there seems to be a possibility, then they have a multi-tiered system whereby a set of reviewers will come back to you, they will ask for evidence, they will do a cross-checking. So what I'm trying to say is that this question, in the bunch of citizen science projects that we have been engaging with, they are deeply aware, and I'm sure you also would be, because that credibility is at the heart of what you're going to claim eventually. So there is an effort at ensuring the quality of data, and there are different mechanisms by which it is done, but they're deeply aware of that concern. Citizens, how can they contribute good data? So they're really ensuring, and there's some very interesting scientific output that's coming out of that. So peer-reviewed journals publishing papers from that data. We are seeing a large number of them. So that's kind of attesting to the fact that there is a huge amount of scientific validity in that sense.
And initially you made this remark of citizen science and free labor.
Yeah.
And I go to Kavita over here because largely citizen science by definition is described as a voluntary effort. And so I'm amused as to why you would draw that comparison. And just a while ago, Kavita, you mentioned that you refer to everybody as a scientist or an explorer. So what's your take on that? How do you view this entire situation?
So let's go back to how many of you have taken part in any science, a survey, a questionnaire, or maybe posted a question which you have noticed something different, right? So we all have these questions. We suddenly see an ant moving in some way. I used to record a bee, a wasp, sorry. It was building its small, that mold-like thing it builds. So I recorded the whole thing for hours together. I'm one of those jobless professions we have. It was on my window, so I was just recording it. And I didn't understand a few things. Like there was this small green color worm that comes, it picks it up, brings it, puts it inside, and then covers the whole thing. So I didn't know whom to ask. Then I looked up on the web, and there's this ISC professor, Ghadarkar, right? A very well-known evolutionary biologist. I just took a shot. I mean, he's a big person. So I wrote to him, I sent him my video, and I said, why did this? So I did the experiment of taking another green color worm similar to it. I took it, I got it on a tree, took it, put it very close to its home, what it was building. So basically it was laying its eggs, it covers it. The wasp comes, goes around to see if there was any like a leak or a hole or something, didn't find, picks up this. I thought, okay, is it going to behave like a human? Arey, muft mein mil gaya, so let's keep it inside. No, it picks it up and throws it away. I didn't know what this was. So I wrote to him, and he immediately replied saying that when the wasp goes and stings this green color worm, it gives out some kind of, it has a neurotoxin. So gives it out. So it knows that it is something that it picked up. So it won't pick up anything. You cannot put a worm there and it doesn't put it into the house. Now, as somebody who looks at human behavior, it's a contrast, right? And for me, this was a science. I mean, this was for me an exploration, something that I never knew. And you can write to people. Now, the question is, whom do we write to? And will that person reply? So what I think I'm going to answer one question that you didn't ask is, how do we, all of us, become accountable for somebody who asks a question? Okay, it's very, very difficult in India to get a reply from any scientist. Okay, as somebody who works on air pollution, that's the reason why I'm here, is because we started this almost 4 years ago. We started looking at pollution, just as we started making these sensors in IIIT, and then we put them in different places and all. There was a lot of pollution effects, or at least people were complaining in my apartment complex, because there we have this 50 floor, 26 floor, 36 floor, it's a number. It's a dice roll and somebody builds. And this pollution effect, I mean, there was a lot of grumbling in the society, right? I mean, I'm feeling breathlessness, I have irritation, I have migraine and all. I said, let's give numbers to this, okay? So I got those pods and I requested, like you said, I made them part of the whole thing. I requested them to put their pods. I have one of the members here who was so nice to volunteer. We put this in different apartment complexes, facing some of them facing, we had reference. So there was a scientific part of it which we took care. But what they were helping and also being aware of is the data was in a dashboard that they had access to. And we were showing them, the data was showing them. Sometimes I used to put down saying, today it's very high, please don't go out for a walk. The AQI is very high because there's a local, whatever, the scrubbing thing. But what did it help is, it brought a community which is, in principle, we are all like nuclear in this community. I really don't know who my neighbor is, okay? But we got a lot of us together. And then we started fighting. We even protested, getting people like us to protest on the street with banners. Oh my God. But we did, because we had data. Okay, and the people who were part of it, who helped us collect this data, we were analyzing it. They also became aware of how this data itself is analyzed. And at one point, like all arrogant people, when somebody asked me this question, how do you know your data is correct? I said, it's peer reviewed. It's published. Okay? And I saw this blank look and I said, oh my God, he doesn't know. Then I kind of kicked myself after that. And then I said, I'm just being as stupid as a lot of people. So then I explained to him what it means. Like we collect the data and all peer-reviewed papers are not correct. I'm not saying that. But I told him the process, that there is an error also. So how do we bring people in is to be more transparent about the whole scientific process. Headlines from scientific findings cannot be clickbaits. Right? The moment you do that, we lose every one of us. If somebody just puts a headline saying, silica in the cement is causing dementia, it might cause, but it's a headline. I don't have any data for it. Okay? Then what happens? People stop believing in you. Because what we need to get the people to believe in us is, we all of us engage and ask questions to each other, right? I mean, we have one program I'm doing as a long program. That's how I got started into this. There's this very small village in Assam called Bongegong, right? Very close to this. So I got a call from a friend of mine who runs an NGO, and she said, there's a high incidence of epilepsy in this area. Families and families, like children, everybody. So I do a lot of brain mapping and all, but epilepsy is not my field. But she said, can you come once when you are here? I want you to meet them. I went, and then now what we have realized, and it's a lot of data. The people in that village are giving us data. What they're giving us is, they're giving us data of what is the contamination in their fish ponds, what is the contamination in their paddy fields. We don't know any correlation still. And then we are trying to get their symptoms. How did it start? When did it start? So they are now becoming a part of this project. Because epilepsy, AEDs, that is anti-epilepsy drugs, they have long-term effects. And for villages, for families inside a village to have it is not really good. So now they've become a part of this exploration. If you go to this Bongegong and talk about epilepsy, they know a lot more than what I know. They'll exactly tell what happens, when the attack will come. That they will say what is the tremor, how long it will last. And they've also lost the superstitions of placing a metal keychain in their hand. Why? Because a doctor told them, doctor told them that that is not, it doesn't have any effect. You just give it to them so that their nails don't kind of cut this one, or you don't make sure that the tongue doesn't get. So it does help. It's only that we all need to kind of step down from our high horses, and when somebody asks a question, answer it. However, we think it is very small for us.
And I have one question in that sense, is that if you use the label of citizen science, so the question that I have had, and I keep struggling even with the organizing committee, is what is citizen science and what is not citizen science? Is it an important question to ask at all? And how does it matter? So if you are looking at it, because there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of potential, and there's a lot of talks of the democratization of science, that it will come down from the ivory towers of the institutions and it will be in the hands of the people and all that. And I think there is a huge amount of potential. But what is the analytical value then of calling something citizen science? So for instance, in this case, if I may ask, would you call it a citizen science project, or this is like a survey project? I might just push, and maybe I'm splitting hair here, but that we have a questionnaire, and you administer this questionnaire to a certain set of people in a certain context, and you get a certain set of data. Or is there more to it, or is this a exception to the kind in which we will do our research? Because as scientists, that's what we are doing. If it's about public health, you go around with a survey or with some capacity building, and you get data, and you create a scenario, or you create a picture. So, which is absolutely fine, and I have no problem with that. My question and my concern more to myself is it citizen science? Because then what is the role of the citizen beyond just being a source of data? So the agency of the citizen, does the citizen have a say in the designing of the project? And like the title of our panel itself suggests, do citizens really then influence the scientific process, or do they just become partners in something that people like us at institutions? Because, we might say that everybody is a scientist, but it matters where that scientist is from. So that's also an institutional thing. I mean, I am at IIT, so people think I know how much I know. That stamp matters. And that's the institutional structure of science. So is science a method? Is science a output? Is science the institution? So this question of what is science also then is, I think, quite important, which we need to engage with. Otherwise, it's almost a case of anything goes, which is my concern actually. But
my just follow up to Pankaj's question to you only, it's just about correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm just trying to shorten this a little bit. But you're saying that is the involvement of the citizen limited to the methodology of doing science versus problem solving? So is that the distinction that you're trying to bring in?
That could be one.
Okay.
What else could be? No, go ahead, please.
This is a question to you.
No, I'm saying that could be one way also of looking at it, but that's what I was saying.
So to answer this question about whether citizens are also driving your methodology or your problem statement, I would say in a way they do. Maybe not the immediate one. For example, I may start off by saying, I just want to look at how it affects the lungs, or maybe the upper respiratory system with maybe PM 2.5 or 10. But then when I get questions from the citizen of the people around and say, have we looked at, say, effect on the brain or the heart? So now what are they doing? They're giving me an idea. Okay, they're also going to be a part of my next maybe design. We just have to hear them out, because many of the science that we do in the labs are trying to solve some problem or the other. I mean, some create problems, but some of us do solve, at least attempt to solve problems. So I'm not making an atomic bomb. So in that sense, they are also part of, every one of us are a part of both the problem statement and the solution and the path to the solution. Just that when do we, like what Pankaj was saying, when do we bring in enough rigor to make sure that we don't lose the trust of whatever is the findings, right? Because then it becomes like a very open-ended problem statement. That means there's a lot of data, there's a lot of noise, and then you push all the ML algorithms on it and something would come up, but then does it stand the scrutiny of whatever is happening? So I think when I say everybody is a scientist, I mean they have to bring that rigor into their training. I mean, when they say, oh, I had a migraine yesterday and it was because of pollution, I will ask that question again. There was pollution previous day, did you have? The day before that, you have. I'm not discrediting their data point. All I'm asking is, I'm trying to making sure that there is a pattern to it, which is what we look for, right? Which we have to make something. So then they'd stop and ask themselves, was there something else they did which gave rise to this? So it's not to say they can't do it or that there is a distinction between the two. It is just each of us are expertise in different area. If we all can come together and we have a platform where we can interact, then I think there are a lot of problems we can solve. Because this is a very huge country. And I'm telling you, every area has a problem. And it's so unique.
And given the fact that you just brought in this amazing point about how we are a huge country and we're diverse, we're extremely diverse, and that's the beauty of it. But there's also another small question that arises here, which I'll pose to both of you before we open the panel for questions. One last question. So it is common knowledge that there are quite a few people who still fall prey to superstitions. And in such a situation, while I have hope for citizen science and the entire society becoming extremely informed through science, but it is a reality that we are not quite there yet. And the society, many people still do fall prey to superstitions. And in those situations, as scientists, how do you think such citizen science projects can be even successful? Are we expecting too much from the citizen to be able to drive a scientific inquiry? Or I mean, even if you could answer, like, how far do you think we are? And I mean, this is one question. After that, we open the floor for questions.
So I don't think citizen science can solve the superstition problem. I mean, it's at a completely different level, depending on what our value systems, what we think is real, so citizen science is, so again, for me, the question is, what is citizen science? And there is again a lot of academic work across from Europe, from the US, on categories of citizen science, on the history of citizen science. The very interesting question of why do we call it citizen science and why don't we call it public science or community science? Is it, so my colleague in IIT Bombay, in IIT Delhi, no, he looks at it as perhaps a moment in the neoliberal term. It's a moment in the neoliberal turn where the citizen becomes more important than the community. So we have a very strong and a very long tradition, including in the anti-superstition movement of public science, of people science. So the question, these are questions that I'm interested in answering as to, is that different from what we now call citizen science? Did they do things differently? Were the methods different? Were the purposes different? So I think these might be very interesting questions to ask. I don't know about the superstition kind of answer. And the other thing that would be very interesting as a research project is to study the citizen scientist herself. So who is this individual who's willing to contribute data? Who is this individual who's willing to be part of this project? Does it get restricted to a certain class of people? Does it get restricted to a certain set of people with certain set of access to certain technologies? Are they from a certain age group? Are they from a certain geography? Because studying these people almost from a sociological perspective will also give us a lot of insights into why they volunteer, if they volunteer at all. So that the question of volunteering came up, but we can pick it up. Is it really volunteering? So we go by that premise but is there more to it than that? So there are many other questions, of course the scientific questions, but also of the people and the systems and the structures that do citizen science. And I just, a very nice quote, I'll just finish with that. When we were doing this report, the Hindustan Times in 2018 did a full page Sunday magazine article on citizen science. And this is how that article begins. It says, they don't have PhDs or wear lab coats. They range in age from 10 to 75. But citizen scientists are helping actual scientists. So there is a differentiation between a citizen scientist and somebody called the actual scientist. So that barrier, so what is the demarcation principle? What's to be included, what's to be excluded? I find those questions as interesting as the data that the birders are putting together.
So, very quick answer so that we can get questions from this. So, there's no. You have a lot more to say than I do. I won't call it where science and scientific methodology can help is not maybe superstition. I would say some myths that people had maybe can be addressed by some kind of a procedure, method, exactness, something that comes with the rigor, right? And it can come from maybe labs, it can come from institutions where so-called the actual scientist, and it can also come from the citizen scientist itself by their own analysis, right? So for example, this whole science of so-called science of astrology and horoscopes, right? It is not for us to break it. It is actually every one of us, sometime we have to sit down and say how much of it is actually real and how much of it is what is just something that we are making it real because we are internalizing it. So it comes with this question. To answer this question, all of us can be scientists or explorers or researchers or whatever we want to call, as long as we are schooled to ask this question, why something is happening. Okay, and I think somewhere we have stopped asking that question because it has become very complex. Because we discredit any question, anything that is coming as a question from somebody. Instead of saying, in this horoscope, this guy said this to me and I think this is true because this is what happened. Instead of just saying, you're nonsense, you are illiterate, we kind of, let's see where this positioning is coming from and how do we explain this in some kind of a format or equation, whatever you want to call it, to that person, right? I think that would help. So I think we can, get questions.
So with that, I think we'll open this panel for questions. Oh, we already have. Yes, we'll first go with Giridhar. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for a really absorbing conversation. I was wondering that one of the features of post-colonial societies is that higher education is typically in the language of the colonizer, ex-colonizer, right? And there is tons of research, tons of education research to show that critical thinking is hard to acquire in a language that is not your own. You can memorize, you wrote memorization is easy enough or hard enough, whatever, but critical thinking is best served by education in the home language or mother tongue or whatever. I was wondering what the panel has to say about the fact that this citizen science, our higher education is in English, and that may itself be a major barrier to a large scale buy-in into what Nehru would have called the scientific temper. Thank you.
So, Giri, is it working? Yeah, I think that's a very valid concern, and again, from the community of citizen scientists and ecology that I am part of and I'm studying, and this is a deep concern, and one also constantly encounters huge challenges to be able to deal with it. What do you do with it? So the fact that language, technology can be a barrier, people are aware to that reality, and at least in the panels that we have organized and we talk about, there is this effort, even issues like gender, what kinds of people get included, what kind of people get left out. So I think people are aware and alive to the challenge and the problem, Whether we are going to be able to solve it, and whether citizen science or these projects can do it, or it's a much larger agenda, and this we are only a symptom of a larger problem, if one might put it that way, because there's no doubt about the fact that particularly in ecology, because knowledge is so much about language, it is so much about the local environment, that we are going to miss out a lot. But that's a long way to go. And all I can say is, like I said, there is an awareness and there is a concern about the fact that people are getting left out. And there is some effort at doing something about it. But that's the best I can respond to from what I know.
The next question, please.
Yeah. So to the panelists, I want to ask, what is the difference between citizen science and science outreach? Because citizen science in some sense just adds value to observations, because you are, from the perspective of the scientists, you are increasing the observations. From the perspective of the people doing the observations, they feel happy that they have contributed to a larger cause. But in essence, the science is missing.
I think Pankaj can answer this question because they've run. But from my perspective, when we say outreach, we are putting forth or putting to the citizens what we have found. Okay, it's something that I have found something in my lab, and I've done this whole rigorous research, and I've published these papers, and now I'm going to put it up and explain to people what I have found. Okay, and this is like saying this the whole methodology of it plus the findings and what is the implications of it. When I say citizen scientist, it can be two ways. I agree to what you're saying, that it could be just that they are part of some an experiment you're conducting. Sometimes there's a lot of noise. But what we should take care of is make sure that when we go to the citizen and ask them for, can you help us with this? Or do you have this information about this? It is based on some very strict or good methodology that we have already designed in the lab. So we can't go and just simply ask them, did you see a wasp going from point A to point B? But I have to tell them why I'm asking for this wasp to going, why I'm asking this question, and what is my objective of this research. So that's where I think we can make a connect. If I can tell them I am doing this research because I want to understand how the spine moves or how the brain works or how objectification works, then they understand that when they are taking the data or they're being part of this whole system, they're just as rigorous as, at least they're being exact, if not rigorous, right? But it is still what we should make sure that it doesn't become like just getting some input and there is no back-end process which is rigorous enough to consider these points and fit it into whatever the research question we are trying to answer. There is always this fear because there's a lot of noise that comes in. Sometimes research problems also go all over the place because there's just too much noise and we are scared that the person will lose interest. The citizens will lose interest, right? If I say, in principle, PM10 will not get into the respiratory system, half of them will just simply go away from this team because they have somehow they want to actually pin this problem on somebody, right? But we have to actually make sure that we tell them the truth, that PM10 can do this, PM2.5 can do this. Sometimes it does have the effect. It doesn't directly go into the brain. There is the blood-brain barrier. Those are things that go through outreach also. So I don't see these two to be in conflict, but one would lead to the other. But Pankaj?
I think this is the same issue that will be in any science that you do. So if you separate doing of the science from communicating or outreach of the science, so when we say, so the question again is what do we mean by when we say citizen science? So if science is about generating new knowledge or a new understanding or solving a problem, and the outreach or the communication is post facto, that you have solved a scientific problem or you have an understanding, which we might do as regular actual scientists. So this sometimes I think the blurring of this barrier in the citizen science discussion is kind of the problem that I'm trying to kind of figure out. So why should it be any different if a good rigorous citizen science project generates an idea of air pollution where she's working? That's one process, and communicating the results of that process and that project or that research would be the outreach. So I'm wondering if you're referring to probably something else, or we are getting that question slightly incorrectly.
So community participation happens for both. I think that's what you were trying to look at. But I think the motivation between that participation is probably something that can maybe have certain divisions or distinctions. That's one of the ways probably. But I think we can probably discuss this. We'll go to the next question there, and then okay, her and then we'll take 3 more questions. And do we have any more questions? I don't think we have more time. Is it? 3 is okay, fine. All right.
Cool. Hi. So I wanted to ask, a couple of years ago, there was some videos going around the internet talking about the biohacker movement. And there was this gentleman who was, I think, who injected himself with CRISPR. He was encouraging people to genetically modify themselves or something. There were other people as well. I think I saw this video where he was working with dogs in his backyard. So that's a different concern altogether. But should movements like these prevail? And one question that they asked was, should scientific journals also identify them, and should we gatekeep them from publishing their work? So,
I mean, that's a fantastic question, and I really don't. So who decides? If you go back maybe 100 years ago, and we have very senior scientists here who could perhaps tell us more, a lot of science happened that way. People did try themselves. I mean, so where does the gatekeeping happen? Who gets to do gatekeeping? I mean, the kind of examples you're given, we might be concerned, but maybe gatekeeping also impedes scientific research, because maybe there are interesting questions that somebody is not technically qualified, is not in an institution, who is not authorized, or who does not have the legitimacy to do that experiment. So these are gray areas, and there is work again documenting stuff like that in parts of the world where people are inhabiting those gray areas or what might be considered problematic and pushing boundaries. So I don't have a more definite answer than that, but I think it's a very important question, and I don't know if you have something to think about, say about that.
So this goes back to what I think this whole forum and all this discussion is, can we come up as a country, come up with something where any such video is not kind of dismissed, but there is a discussion on it. And at the end, I think citizens also should take the responsibility, just like all of us, to kind of sieve through this information. See, we either classify people saying they're dumb, they don't know anything, and hence they will believe everything, or they're super bright and they will understand everything. But there is this whole spectrum that we actually have to give every one of us a credit, right? And then let there be a proper discussion on it, right? And then maybe at the end, maybe whatever this video that has been put up is maybe not correct. And I've seen one thing. If I am able to tell somebody that this is the rigor, this is the scientific data, and this is how it has come to, I have a feeling that in India, Indians per se, all of us, believe in it a lot. Okay? Why? We don't know. But we like data points, we like this assurances, right? We don't simply just accept something. So I think we should have this forum. I mean, some place where we are not dismissive, but we engage in a constructive criticism, if I want to call it, so that we are not kind of putting people down. So like what Pankaj said, at the end, we might lose good people. Okay.
So my question to Kavita Vemuri, regarding air pollution, you have involved the residents of the community.
Yes.
And have you tried the students in the campuses, higher education, engineering colleges, students, to involve in this citizen science?
Yeah, so
with low cost air quality monitors.
So we have the pods, the sensor pods and all are designed, developed in our IIIT, Dr. Sachin's labs. So what we do is we have put them in different places. For example, we put them in maybe slightly rural areas around Hyderabad, and monitoring them, looking at them, understanding the data has been done by the students who are from that village or from that place, studying in different colleges. Because our students and we can't go. But they also are asked to go and tell the people in the village what this data means. I'm just not putting a pod, right? I'm also asking them, telling them, go and talk to people, tell them what it is about. And actually, it's interesting that everybody is very curious about what the data is, right? When you put something, you just do an experiment. We go and put a pod in the center of the road. It just do a placebo effect. Just put it there and you say, this sensor will detect all your temperatures. So we are not a country where we just go around, just go away. I mean, we are becoming that, but we are still very curious. They will stop, they'll ask you 100 questions. How does it work? If I put paracetamol, will it work? We have had these questions when we used to do this thermal imaging. So the people who are in the, taking it to what you're saying, taking it to the village, taking it to different colleges, we are doing it. There are at least 2-3 colleges who are working on it. We want more discussion on it. I mean, one is to just collect the data, but I would want everyone, especially the younger generation, to now start looking at the exposome. That means the effect, Dr. Soumya was talking about it. What is the effect of all these pollutants long term on our health? I don't see anybody asking this question. This is a very fundamental question. We still don't know. We have high incidence of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. We have so many, but we don't know the cause of it. I'm not saying it's pollution, but can we actually ask this question and go deeper? And that's where I think lot of data coming, even if it is noise, coming from different parts of this country would help a scientist who's doing the data analytics to say, there seems to be something. Even if that is the citizen science, I'm very happy. Right? If I find something very strange like a plant, a sudden, some rare flower or a rare whatever bird or this one, I immediately write to somebody and say, what is this? Maybe it will help some scientist somewhere actually say, oh, okay, how did they find this frog here? So I found some different kind of a frog in that area when I went Nagarhole and I just put it up. And somebody said, oh, where was this geolocation? Right? So it is just that curiosity part, and we will help in the long run. I'm sure about it.
So thanks for your effort for making it.
Thank you for the thought-provoking discussion. My question is a little more in the social behavior context. Have there been any scientific studies to understand the pattern of behavior of an average Indian towards civic responsibilities, whether it is around waste management, whether it is around compliance to traffic rules, for instance, but fundamentally around waste. In our houses, we tend to keep things very clean, but when it comes to common public properties, etc., there are unless there's a strong regulation, there is no propensity of average citizens, whether rich or poor, whatever it may be, to take ownership of the country and the public property as its own. I'm wondering if there are any studies and if there have been cases to demonstrate what is it that will cause people to change behavior.
So from the behavioral economics part of it, there are studies which say willingness to pay. Who pays for it? Right? In India, the problem is nobody wants to pay for it. The pay doesn't have to be monetary, right? It can be something else. I take the garbage from my house, I'll put it on my neighbor's house, right? Why? Because it's now the neighbor's problem. there are a few studies which have looked at why waste management, this behavioral change is not happening. So let's take one of the very few government initiatives that I really was very, very enthusiastic about is the Swachh toilet, the Swachh Bharat mission, right? I was really excited because I said, oh my God, finally somebody is addressing it. It was a hype, it went up, everybody had their toilets. Everybody had their toilets, but they still went out. Okay? Then there were people who came from design and they said, let's design the toilet differently. Maybe that is what it is. So there were the students who went out and did it. They designed toilets which looked like a forest or something so that, it's different. But it still doesn't change. So the question actually is, if you do a solution for one set of people, it doesn't work for another set of people in India. I don't know why. Okay, and how do we bring about this change? Penalty, look at the traffic violations. We study traffic violations. They know they're going to get charged 1,000 rupees if they violate, but they still do it. Because there is something called, we are high risk people. High stakes, high risk people, somehow. So it's when will this behavior change? It's a question I also want to ask. But we have found that willingness to pay is one metric that we found that they were not willing to pay for anything which is to do with what they consider as a government ka kaam hai. Cleaning that is a government's job. It's not my job. I've sent students out to do this kind of small projects. Every shopkeeper says, trim tree, put the cup out. There's a garbage bin, put it in that. He'll say, but I'm paying for that municipal lady who comes and cleans every day. So why should I clean? So I think we need both. I think maybe I'm hoping that more inclusion into the scientific exploration part will maybe make them look at it from, if I say danger from health, maybe they'll change. I think that's.
I think with that, let's thank Kavita and Pankaj. And in the spirit of curiosity and questioning, I hope these discussions never stop, but today's panel discussion has to stop now. And thank you so much for being a lovely audience. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.